Evolutionary Network Hardcore 2.0 is coming your way, episode 136. This is going to be a really fun one. We're going to talk about top steroid cycles for those under 30 years old by Para Pharma. So, look, we know that a lot of you listen to the show who are under 30. We have the over 30 crowd, we have the under 30 crowd. But this is an important podcast for those of you who are maybe late teens, 20s, who are starting to get into bodybuilding and you thinking about using steroids in the future and you want to do it the right way. So this is the podcast for you. So in this one, we're going to discuss several different things. We're going to talk about the science behind male development, really educate you on what happens in the body. We're going to talk about risks of using steroids too early in life. We're going to talk about the best orals for under 30 years old, and we're going to talk about the best injectables for under 30 years old. And then we're also going to talk about why Parapharma is a great option and very, very important to understand how good they are. But first, let's talk about the science behind male development. So, look, we're in modern times. Although our male reproductive system and our puberty finishes up usually before 20 years old, your body isn't going to completely develop physically and mentally until you're mid to late 20s. So, and I used to tell people all the time when I was a high school teacher and weight training, weightlifting coach and judge, I used to tell some of my guys that. I'd be like, look, you're not going to develop the meal. And they gave me this story like, are you serious? What are you talking about? I stopped growing a year ago. I stopped growing when I was 17, Steve, Coach Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, look, when you, even though you stop growing at a certain age, it doesn't mean that your complete body mentally and physically completely stopped. So you're going to continue developing in your 20s. That's why it's important to stay in school and not drop out of high school, not drop out of college and have to go back because you're still able to learn and educate yourself and build skills at that age better. I'll give you an example, learning a foreign language. You know how hard it is to learn a foreign language when you get mobster's age? Even people who immigrate to America
Yeah,
have a hard
yeah, yeah,
time learning English. They have to stick to their native language because they have a hard time learning a new language. Or if you how many Americans go to live in Mexico or go to live in Central America or go to live in France or Italy because they want to be expats and they retire who are mobsters age and they don't pick up that language. They don't learn Italian, they don't learn French, they don't learn Spanish living in those countries. They stick to English and they talk English with everybody, because it's hard to learn a language. That's why. But when you're younger, it's easier to learn a language because your brain is still developing and physically
yeah.
you're still developing. So it's easier to learn skills and motor skills and stuff. This is why if you take up a sport like tennis when you're mobster's age for the first time, you're going to suck at it. But if you take up tennis in your teenage years and you
Yeah.
develop playing tennis from the time you're 12 years old to 25 years old, as an older adult, you're going to pick up that skill. Like riding a bicycle, for example, you learn, even if you haven't run the bicycle in 10 or 15 years, you're still going to be able to ride a bicycle at mobster's age because of that skill you develop when you're younger. So you got to keep that in mind. And the reason is our prefrontal cortex, which handles our decision making and planning things out, is one of the last things that's going to develop for you. So I can even make the argument that that's why car insurance is so fucking expensive for people in their early 20s is because you don't have the best decision making yet,
Yeah.
so that's why you pay a hell of a lot more. You're going to be caught getting into more accidents when you're younger. I've known a lot of people growing up when they became 16, 17, 18 years old who died in car accidents because of bad driving. They ran into a tree, they ran into a ditch, they hit other people, whatever. So yeah, go ahead, Monster, talk about.
There's some specific science regarding sexual maturity, which we'll touch upon. There's specific science behind your ability to add muscle and or strength, and I'll touch on that. And there's even something, and I've mentioned this person in one of our shows some time ago, Steve, Dr. Tom Bouchin, who's a really, really kind of probably one of the highest guys in the United Kingdom when it comes to stroke and recovering from a stroke. And he specifically runs an organization. He uses a word which I think applies here for the learning process, which is plasticity, basically saying your brain cells are more malleable when you're younger, and it's easier to recover from a stroke when you're younger. It's easier to learn. Your brain is arguably more malleable and it's more open and whatever else. Equally, as you just said, Steve, when it comes to the brain again, life lessons, realizing you're not invincible, which you don't kind of pay much attention to when you're younger. Life itself, jobs, work, love life, divorces, legal cases, all that kind of stuff, things that might physically happen to you. All of those things teach you something. The problem you might have, and we don't want to be preachy, guys, because you are listening to this show and you are specifically listening to the show to learn how to get the best out of your body. And again, we understand our demographic. I would argue, Steve, that our majority audience for these shows and for shows that like these shows, not that there are many like these shows, is the 18 to 25 demographic. So we want you to listen to this show, learn the information from it, and apply it at the appropriate time. Right, so let me give you two statistics, Steve. One is strength and one is muscle. If the listener, male or female, did not train at all, then your height, as Steve said already, would probably be about as tall as you're going to be age 21. But the amount of muscle that you'll add probably won't maximize until about age 25 to 30. That's with no training in the gym whatsoever. That's just you walk around doing normal shit, working, college, whatever. In terms of your actual physical strength, it's between 30 and 35. If you don't do any kind of weightlifting training, bodybuilding, whatever else, you will be the strongest you're ever going to be in your life between the ages of 30 and 35. This is me making this shit up and saying, oh, this is from my experience. I looked this stuff up a long time ago. What happens when you train is you pretty much add 5 to 10 years to those numbers. So you won't add the maximum amount of muscle to between 30 and 35, and you won't hit your peak strength if you do work out to between 40 and 45 years of age. That's great. It means that we stay stronger and more muscular longer, all things being equal, than the average Joe who does not work out. So that's a great thing for you guys to remember. Now think about those numbers I've just given you. Those aren't with steroids. That's just naturally, either trained or untrained. I've given you both those numbers. That's not saying, oh, if I take steroids now, arguably, Steve, there's even a thing about if you take steroids too soon, and I've seen this presented, but I'd like to see the science behind it as well, you might actually inhibit your gains. So in other words, you will add muscle because of steroids if you take them younger, but you will inhibit your total, your overall, and the number that you would have hit if you'd have left it longer will come quicker. So you'll max out, for example, 40 when you could have maxed out at 45. So that's another reason for why we hold you back. I think the number one thing in reality, Steve, is the sexual health. And we'll touch upon that, bring Steve back in. And quite simply, and again, this is probably a little tiny bit preachy, Steve, I see this again and again and again. It's just the length of time that Steve and I have been online doing these shows, trying to help in our own particular way, and just the experience of seeing what people talked about since we've been online. We've said in a show recently, and I'll use that example again, Steve. I've been online arguably since 1990, and I can count probably in the hundreds the number of younger listeners, younger members on forums that come on, super keen, super eager, 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22. And I've seen the argument presented, you can go to war, you can vote, you can act as a member of parliament here in the UK, you could probably become a senator in America, all these other things that you can do, and yet we'll be going, you shouldn't take steroids. And the issue is thus, we see you change your mind. What you want when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 is not how you think and feel when you physically mature and you're in a relationship and you've got kids of your own and buddies have done overdoses on narcotics and whatever else. And so you start to think differently because of life, and you will almost certainly change your mind. So we want you to do stuff in a responsible way. We will explain the sexual side, and we will also talk about how the best approach for us is to do mild, probably because you're going to respond incredibly well, and just leave it as long as you possibly can, whether it's injectable or orals. Be aware of the sexual health side. So let's expand on that a little bit, Steve, with
Yeah.
regards to the sexual health.
So, I mean, based on what we've said, look, it also means all the stuff we're saying. It also means that when you introduce things into your system that alter your brain and your reproductive system, which anabolic steroids will do, that you run the risk of. I tried to find a synonym for this when I was doing my pre-show writing for this article that I'm going to present for the show. But I tried to come up with a synonym, mobster, for messing things up, and the best word I came up with was bungle things. So um, this is
Yeah.
why people who use anabolic steroids at a younger age tend to need TRT much sooner in life than those who wait until their 30s to mess with PEDs. And full disclosure, I didn't wait. I waited to use anabolic steroids till I was about 28 or 29.
Yeah.
Mobster, you waited till
37.
yeah. So we're not just. I mean, we're not just like
Let me give you a phrase that
pulling
might be
shit out of
very
our
yes,
ass here.
Steve.
We're
We got a phrase here in the UK which we call putting the cart before the horse, meaning you've done things the wrong way round and you're not going to make as much progress as if you've done them the right way round. So that's the gist of that. It's like doing something before you're ready, jumping off a cliff without a parachute, all these kind of things. So we understand the impetus. We've been young, and all of our more helpful gurus, writers, experts, whatever you want to call it, in the whole of the industry, including Stevesmi and myself, we've some of those have made mistakes, and pretty much it's a given that if you do decide to do things straight away, they will try to negate the side effects. But if you do listen, 9 times out of 10, I'd argue that the advice is to put the cart behind the horse. So as Steve said, not to sort of fuck it up a little bit or whatever else. And we do this because we want you to get the best results. We want you to, I mean, the sexual health thing specifically, never mind the effect on the brain, because there are steroids that have a specific effect on the brain. The sexual health is thus. And I'll just use this last thing that we've seen examples of, thing, Steve. And it's you'll get at 18, 19, 20, or 21. I have seen younger, but this is generally speaking. And someone will come on the forums, whether that's Evolutionary, Reddit, Instagram, whatever. And they'll say something like, I want to be an amazing bodybuilder. I want to get into fantastic shape. I've been beaten up at school, whatever. They have a reason for doing what they're doing. And everyone's got their own particular thing for that. But they'll say something like, I don't give two fucks about having kids. It's really not on my radar. So if it does affect my ability to reproduce, my sperm count, whatever, I don't give a damn. And you'll sit there going, that's what you're saying now, mate. You will change your mind. You will meet a girl. Or you will find a partner. If you're a girl listening to this show, you will find a male partner. And the decision you make when it comes to your sexual health can be, it's not impossible, but it can be very, very difficult to undo. And just to hammer this point before we move on, Steve, I'm thinking, I've used this example. I know personally a ex-professional IFBB pro has been on the Olympia stage. This is not some great revelation. He has posted about this himself. Him and his wife have gone through IVF. He was a low dose, 1.2 grams, I think, is the most he's ever used, to get to the Olympia stage to win British and other championships, English championships in his class. If I mention his name, you could Google him and see what he looked like. And he's talked about the pain that his wives have to go through on IVF, the emotional roller coaster that him and her have had to go through. And this is a low dose, low approach, sensible kind of usage kind of guy, but purely and simply being a professional bodybuilder, arguably, whether it was his endocrine system or her endocrine system, because they've never been that specific, it's been an absolute emotional mess for them. And again, this was someone that left it to the late 20s, early 30s to try and have kids, and so on and so forth. And that's a fact of life, Steve. People that are leaving it
yeah.
later to have
So
we've talked about
IVF, and another thing, yeah, another thing
it's
too.
expensive as well, Steve. Yeah.
Well, another thing too in America, and Europeans laugh at America for being so backwards. They're actually banning IVF in many states now, and the federal government is probably gonna ban IVF too. So if you want to go the IVF route, guess what? You're not gonna be able to do it. So in America, so you'd probably have to go to another country to do it. So now you can add having to either travel to a different state or travel to a different country to get the IVF done. What IVF is, and I'm not an IVF expert, but what it is where they basically take the sperm and they basically get
And
the
I
egg.
believe, Steve, as the
They
egg as
feed the
well, and then
egg
they
with
fertilize in
yeah,
in vitro, and then they put it
yeah.
back in.
Yeah, so it's basically it's not the natural way to do it. It's
No,
basically a lab basically
yeah,
getting the egg pregnant, getting the
yeah, yeah,
sperm into the egg. So
yeah,
it's like and it's very like you said, it's very expensive. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It's
yeah.
also going to be illegal in much of the country in the
It's
next couple years.
uncomfortable as hell.
And it's something, but that's the reality. And there's that funny Sex in the City. A lot of you younger guys have no clue what I'm talking about. Mobster, you might. Have you seen Sex in the City?
Barely, yeah. I never watched it, but I know about it.
So it was a show in America, and it was based in New York City, and the characters were basically four women, and they live their life in New York City as single women. Well, one of the women ends up getting married to some rich doctor from Scotland, and can't he's got fertility issues, she's got fertility issues. They're older, I think they're in their 30s or 40s, and they can't get pregnant, so it basically strains their relationship. Now it's a funny show, it's a sitcom, but it's also a show with drama, and that was one of the dramatical parts, was she could not get pregnant, and it put such a strain on their relationship. They ended up getting divorced. They're like literally the perfect couple. He's like this rich doctor, she's just this gorgeous brunette, whatever. But that's reality, and I've seen that as well, from friends and family and everything. And they end up having to go adopt, which I think is a better thing anyway, because there's a lot of kids out there that need
Yeah,
families. I'm pro
yeah.
adoption,
No, no, exactly. Yeah,
but my point is, it does put strain in a relationship. And you as a man, when you get older, as Momster said, when you're in your teens and 20s, you don't think about that. But once you get into your
no,
30s and 40s, women are going to stomp their feet and they're going to want to have a kid. And if you can't provide that kid, you're probably going to end up getting divorced, or you're going to have to go that IVF route where another man's sperm is going to have to
yeah.
get your wife
That can be
pregnant,
a, that can be a head fuck. That can be a head
Yeah.
fuck, Steve.
And so you're gonna
Let
have to
me, let
raise
me,
another man's child just because of this. So there's just things to think about. But let me go over the
let
science,
me do one
Monster.
more thing. One more thing,
Go
Steve,
ahead, go
because
ahead. Yeah.
you and I have talked about nature sometimes and how using steroids arguably is against nature, right? But let's just cover this for a second. So we've talked about primitive man, the last 2 million years, the last 100,000 years of civilization, and how we be running around the Serengeti with our javelins, with our spears, trying to kill antelopes and whatever else. So, in terms of fertility, we used to have kids earlier. The ability to have children is, whether you like to admit it or not, a lot easier when you're younger. Plenty of people that have had kids were very willing or wanted to early because we are super fertile when we're younger. Typically, I believe puberty is getting slightly later in modern man, but we're still looking at the ability to actually procreate and have kids probably 15, 16 years of age. The moment your balls drop, the moment girls get tits, basically. Let's put it crudely. But we're not necessarily mentally mature. When we are mentally mature, we're not necessarily arguably physically ready anymore. So it's somewhere in the middle. And the reality is, used to be my parents' generation. So 1945, they would have probably, we're talking about 1960 when they were having kids. Um, you're talking about 21, 22 years of age. Whereas the reality of the situation is now with modern life, Americans and Brits, and for that matter, some European nations, etc., first world countries, we are leaving it later for education, we are leaving it later for careers, but we're making it more difficult. Best case scenario, guys, if you decide to go early, if you decide to ignore the advice in terms of leave it as long as you possibly can, get your sperm frozen, get your eggs put on ice, whatever the fuck it is. And then if you need to take things and go to another
Yeah.
country because
I,
it's super important, do that. But if you've got no sperm and you've got no eggs, you're kind of fucked. So keep that at the back of your mind. The only other side effect, Steve, to touch upon this a little bit, there's arguments to be made, and this probably as much for education as anything else, because I think a lot of younger listeners will probably be focused on the steroids, but they're not on the AIs. They're not on the other things that they should be doing in terms of steroids. Sometimes you just take a steroid and that's what it, no, there are ancillaries, there's PCTs, there's test boosters. So talk about some of the side effects, Steve, that a younger person might have issues with versus
Yeah.
someone that's
And
waited a little.
I want to get into some of the mental and economic factors to,
Yes,
to, to
yes, yes,
factor
yes.
in. But first,
That is
this
one, yeah.
all what we're saying, Lobster, doesn't hit home. I've dealt with teenagers. I can tell you don't deal with teenagers very much. It's hard because if you don't deal with teenagers, it's
Oh,
hard.
I've done voluntary youth work, Steve, and some of the
Yeah.
conversations we had, I got
But
qualified, but
here's
some of the qualifications were some of
but
the comments were crazy. Yeah, go on.
here's the thing, okay? And this is me as an educator speaking. You have to educate people. You can't preach to them. You can't say, "Oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen," because that's going to run hollow. They're not going to get it. So let me explain in simple terms what happens when you use anabolic steroids at a young age or any age. And what happens is this: you're using exogenous hormones. Your body detects that you're using exogenous hormones. So your body says to itself, why do I have to produce my own exogenous hormones? So if you're developing your reproductive system and you introduce exogenous hormones, it's going to interfere with that. As I said earlier, it's going to bungle things up as I put it earlier. So it's going to stop the process from happening. So, and the reason for that is your pituitary glands go dormant. And I don't care if you're 50 years old or I don't care if you're 18 years old. That's going to happen with anabolic steroids, and it doesn't matter what you use. You can use testosterone, you can use Anavar, you can use Primo, you can use any of these steroids that we're going to talk about later in the show, and it's going to happen. And that there's no way around it, and there's no way to prevent it. So don't tell me, oh, Steve, you're wrong. I could run a bunch of Clomid and a bunch of HCG and a bunch of HMG and of this and that, and it can offset it. No, it won't. If that was the case, nobody would need to be on TRT for life. We could just stop our TRT after 5 years and go back, and magically get our reproductive system back in order. But that's not what
Exactly. Yeah.
happens. So
Yeah.
when you interfere with it, the younger you interfere with it, the more damage you create. So that later
Yes.
on in life, your body's not going to be able to know how to produce its own hormones anymore. It's going to completely get shut down.
It hasn't had to for 5 years. We've seen examples of that, Steve. You're quite
So
right.
so it's not even 5 years. Once you use steroids for longer than 20 weeks straight, that's when you start getting the danger zone. That's when you really start causing damage. But when you're a younger person, even just one 12 or 14-week cycle, if you're 18, 17 years old and you run just a 10-week or 12-week cycle, you shut yourself down for 16, 17 weeks if you count the esters. That's going to cause damage, and your body may not ever be able to figure out how to come back from that.
What about this one, Steve? What you've just said. I've seen examples on the forums where someone's done exactly what Steve just said, and this is to put it crudely, this is probably the head fuck of all head fucks, especially when you're younger. When you start to have issues with erections. Now, the idea of the older gentleman, I'm including myself, the quality of an erection compared to when I was younger is different. I don't want to paint too obvious a fucking picture here. It just is. And I use steroids and I train and do stressful shit. But it's way more of a head fuck if you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age, Steve. Natural. And the wind changes and you get a hard on. It just has to have your teacher makes you get a hard on and all this kind of stuff. And you decide, in error perhaps, is pro hormones or steroids or something that fucks with your endocrine system. And even just the quality can change. That is a massive head fuck. But we have seen worst case examples occasionally on the forum. It is occasional, thank Christ. As someone who says, I did a steroid cycle. My buddy at the gym recommended X, Y, and Z. I've done X, Y, and Z. It wasn't that long, and it's been 3 months, and I haven't had a proper hard on since. So when you're in your early 20s, that's a mental head fuck right there. I think literally, as Steve said, it's the fully mature sexual reproductive system being able to cope, arguably, with what we call a little bit of stress versus an underdeveloped, not fully physically mature sexual reproductive system being impacted. And because it
Yeah.
wasn't fully mature, there's that impact can
So let me,
arguably
yeah.
cause permanent problems, as you say, Steve.
So let me finish the science part so people understand this. So what I was saying about the pituitary glands, when you start fucking with your pituitary gland, right, introducing exogenous hormones, the pituitary glands are responsible for producing hormones which hit your nuts, hit your Leydig cells, and signal to them to produce testosterone. You see, so if that's not happening, then you're not get those hormones into your balls. So your balls get fried. That's not the scientific term, but you know what I mean. So your balls get fried at a really young age, and let's say you're playing a video game and your person is at 100% power, right? So once your person drops to zero, it's over. So every time you nail it with a cycle, it goes from 100% to 90%. It's like a battery, it drops to 80 and then it'll come back a little bit, maybe go drop to 80 and go back to 85. Then you run another cycle, it drops to 60 and maybe comes back to 65, 70, and then it drops again. And eventually it hits zero and then the game is over. You have to put another coin into the machine, into the arcade game, right? To start over again, right? So it's the same thing with this. Once you get to zero, guess what? It's not coming back. And you'll get your blood work done and you'll see your LH and your FSH is fried. It's at near zero. And then your total testosterone levels are like at 150, the testosterone levels of a 70-year-old man. And this happens all the time. You'll be 25 years old and you'll have the testosterone levels of a 70-year-old man. So what do you do from here? You can either struggle with it and hope your body manages to come back. You could run a bunch of PCT products and throw the kitchen sink at the issue, or you can go on TRT. So if you do decide, I'm going to go on TRT, now you're basically shut down for life. You're never coming back. Your balls will be fried for life, and your sperm count will be almost nothing. So it's very, very important just to be aware of this. So at the end of the day, it's your decision what to do. It's your life. Just like having sex with no condom with your in college. You go around having sex with no condom in college. The women you're having sex with are having sex with no condom with other guys, and you're
Yeah,
spreading a bunch of STDs. You can end up having problems. Magic Johnson, I don't know if you know who that is, Mobster.
yeah, yeah. I know basketball.
Yeah, he's one of the best basketball players of all time. In my opinion, maybe the top three NBA players of all time. When he was in the NBA, what did he do? They travel on road games. There'd be women outside the hotel,
Thousands of thousands, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
and he didn't use
Didn't he make a
protection.
claim about 11,000 sexual
Yeah,
partners or something? Yeah.
and he wasn't married at the time, but
No, no, he
he
liked.
so he went and he had sex with them. Well, he ended up getting HIV,
Yeah.
and that's it's the situation he got into. And luckily for him, they've come a long way when it comes to HIV and AIDS and treating it. He's been able to live
Mm.
a life, and he got married and everything. But the problem is, you're taking a risk of doing something. Just be aware of the risk you're taking
Yes,
in life
yes,
and hold accountability for yourself. Don't be like, well,
yes.
because that's what's going to happen. And you're going to have to make some uncomfortable decisions as you get older if you decide to use steroids. Now, I just want to be full disclosure. There's guys who use steroids at 17, 18 years old. They get into their 20s, 28 and 29 years old. We've seen them. Boston Lloyd's an example. I think Boston Lloyd had, what, two kids? He managed to have two kids, Mobster.
Certainly, I recall one. You're right there.
Yeah.
Just managed that with,
But
I think,
he,
Dave Columbo's baby making protocol. Yeah,
but
but it was stressful. It was stressful.
yeah, but that's
Talk
just the,
about it.
yeah, but that's luck. There's no protocol to make babies. That's all bro science.
I mean,
The,
literally, the thing was the idea that we had a person on the forums just recently, Steve, and they were talking about this. They were 40, 50 years of age, I believe, and they had used steroids for a long period of time. I believe they started relatively late. And they was talking about sperm counts, and they said something like the average when you're younger is in the tens, if not hundreds of millions. 100 million is not unusual, and you can get into the whole science behind that perhaps in another show. They went from 100 million to 1 million to essentially what was zero, and it took them several years to get back up to a million, which is 1% of where they would have been when they were younger. And it took them best part, I believe, in total, Steve, 6 or 7 years to produce sufficient sperm, because it only takes one, of course, But when you're talking about 100 million versus one and needing just one to get pregnant, and they themselves talked about how massively stressful this was. And this was one of the things I actually commented. He said about his wife, his partner being massively upset. And I said, the reason why you're upset is because you've upset your partner, you've upset your wife or girlfriend with your decision making earlier. So, yeah, I mean, look, guys, we're going to try to give you the best advice when it comes to cycles. We're going to talk about how Para Pharma products are high quality and especially the cycles and products that we're going to talk about. But you must understand the longer you leave it, the better for your sexual health, the better for your reproductive, and so on and so forth. It's super, super important.
So let me touch on a couple things before we move on, Mobster. I'll touch on a little bit of the mental and the economic issue. So the mental issue is this: when you run these hormones, they're very powerful hormones. You're getting a lot of hormones into your system. When you run these cycles, you tend to only want to fuck, work out, and eat. And when you're in your 20s, doing that in your 20s, unless you're a trust fund baby, it's not going to be an investment into your future. You're going to wonder in your 30s and 40s, you're going to look back and you regret it. You're going to regret, why didn't I get another degree? Why didn't I learn a new skill? Why didn't I do these things to better my life later in life? Why was I spending my 20s fucking, working out, and eating? And that's the issue with using anabolic steroids. It throws your mind off. A lot of these steroids out there will throw your mind off, especially the more androgenic ones. Another thing is the economic aspect. Using anabolic steroids, getting the blood work done, the supplements, the lifestyle, the food, the grocery bills, the PCTs, all this stuff, it adds up, man. It adds up. And economically, is it viable to be spending thousands of dollars on that type of hobby per year? It's a very, very expensive hobby. I mean, it would be like playing golf. Golf is an expensive hobby. The membership, the costs to play, the golf clubs, the equipment necessary, the training. Golf is an expensive hobby. Boating is an expensive hobby. So I can name a bunch of expensive hobbies. Fishing is pretty cheap hobby. I mean, you buy the fishing poles, and then you got to buy the bait, the line, and stuff like that. But there's different hobbies out there. Some are expensive, some are cheap. Bodybuilding is not a cheap hobby. So the financial impact, let's say you start using steroids at 18 or 20 and you use them for the next 10 years off and on, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, mobster, and you may come back to regret that. So from an economic perspective, it may not be a smart choice either. So touch on those 2 points, mobster, and then we'll move on to steroids that you can start looking into.
Yeah, listen, right? Demographic of the average steroid user, certainly 15 or 20 years ago, Steve, and I think some of it still applies. Used to be the average age was a little bit higher than now, which is why we can talk about it in that particular way. So it was typically that you'd had an education, meaning you already had your education, you'd already been to college or university, you was already in a job that paid slightly more than the average wage, sometimes significantly more, and it was disposable income. So, for example, 1 to 2 cycles of a year, it's certainly true back in the day, it's slightly cheaper now, Steve, was $1,000 to $2,000 per year on steroids, and the rest of the lifestyle, like your chicken breasts, your training gear, your gym fees, and so on and so forth. But you'd already done your qualifications, you'd already got your diplomas and degrees, you was already earning good money. It's a bit like the pink pound, Steve, in terms of two male guys have slightly more disposable income than a male-female relationship simply because of the things that they can afford to spend the money on. And your typical
So
steroid-using bodybuilder had slightly more disposable income because they had a good education and because they weighed
yeah,
it.
so 100% correct, because 10, 20 years ago, the people using steroids were white collar professionals. Now, it's definitely mostly blue collar. Like we see on the
Yeah,
forum,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
we have an occasional
Oh,
lawyer,
loads of people with manual jobs. Yeah,
but now it's mostly the guys who are working construction or these union jobs or electricians or stuff like that. So there's definitely been a trend. And I think a lot of it has to do with steroids being a lot more affordable and accessible today than they were 10, 20 years ago. And also, those people have a lot more disposable income than they did back in the day. Back then, they were barely able to afford, food. Now, I think people have a lot more money. There's a lot more gig jobs and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
absolutely, that has changed. So there's definitely a higher percentage of people using
Yes.
anabolic steroids even younger today for that
Yes.
reason.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
yeah, so let's move on, Lobster. Let's talk about the best orals for under 30 years old. Why don't you start us off with the best ones from Para Pharma?
I would look at the most low risk type orals, etc., etc. And there's plenty of debate, Steve, about what risk factors there are, etc., etc. I don't think that the two or three that I might suggest are going to be too far wide of the mark. All orals, and for that matter, all injectables come with some risk. So what we're talking about here is the minimal risk and the minimal stress on your body, sensible dosages that will almost certainly still give you decent results. And of course, not everybody wants to be a 300-pound monster. So, I mean, I'm looking here on Para Pharma's main page, and the first one that obviously springs to mind here, Steve, is Anavar. You're not looking at major gains. Typically, for myself and most users, for 3, 4, 5 pounds on a cycle versus, for example, other orals and injectables that you might look at 5 or 10 pounds. Of course, it's what you keep after the cycle. That's important. They have Anavar 10 and Anavar 50. The typical dose, even for a youngster, Steve, would be the upper end would be 50. I'd actually recommend for our younger listeners something like 30 milligrams per day, because I think the first Anavar cycle, first oral cycle, never mind injectable, you'll get great results from 5 pounds of lean muscular tissue, not much in the way of water bloat, Steve, and arguably less overall physical stress on the body. And of course, my preference for using Anavar, you're also going to enhance your strength. Again, we can debate back and forth between various experts, etc., as to cycle lengths. I think, again, especially for a new, younger listener, I'd actually defer to the shorter length, so 4 weeks. But typically, for example, someone like myself would probably be looking to run Anavar at 50 milligrams a day for 4 to 8 weeks. So again, younger listener, with regards to Anavar, circa 30 milligrams a day. You can always go a little bit up or a little bit down on that, if depending upon your response. And about 4 weeks for the first cycle, Steve. Would you change that before I would suggest another oral? Would that be your way
Yeah.
of running it if
Well,
you was making a suggestion?
ironically, orals might be a smarter pick because you can run a shorter cycle
Yeah,
using orals.
quicker in and out your system.
Yeah, and then this way you won't be suppressed and shut down for as long. Your body will be able to bounce back a lot faster. Remember how I said at the beginning about the battery, about the video game? So you'll have less of a hit on your reproductive system that way. So it's very, very important to keep your cycles short. The shorter, the better. So another one that I would recommend, and it's good for short cycles, 4 week cycles, is going to be Dianabol. And Dianabol is a
Yeah,
dummy-proof
yeah,
steroid and it's great for bulking. So those of you younger guys who are skinny, you've got a skinny physique. You're like me. You grew up really skinny. You grew up the skinny, weak kid at PE. Like I used to not even be able to do one. You know how they used to climb the ropes. I used to not
yeah.
even be able to climb the rope, and these other kids were like climbing the
Okay.
rope like no problem
I could do it
because
when I was 9. I couldn't do it when I was in my teens. That's weird.
you
Yeah,
know
I could do it when I was really young.
yeah, and one of those, Dynamo is perfect for you because then
Yeah,
you got room to grow. It's going to increase your appetite. So you're going to be eating more on it, and so if you're one of those hard gainer types or ectomorphs,
yes,
this would be a
yes.
good option. So with Dynamo, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and you can run anywhere from 10 to 30 milligrams. That's all you need,
Yeah.
and you can just run it solo, and you'll have fantastic results on it, and then you can come off.
You've got a feel good pump, Steve. So
Yep.
it's actually kind of nice one for the younger listeners with the come in from the approaches that we're suggesting and feeling pretty good when you're training in the gym, talking to your bros about the fucking great pump you've got, etc., etc. So that would be a leading one. How many people do we know that have started on that? And again, I'll go with Steve on the dosages, etc. I'm avoiding one, but what would you say with regards to as a final oral? Because I'm going to say forget Superdrol for as long as you possibly can. I might suggest a low dose anadrol, Steve. They've got an anadrol 50 here. I'd actually probably want to take half that. So I'd probably be looking for a younger listener. And again, this is one of those ones where I've not responded to this, but I know younger listeners and users that have. Dosages can vary, but I'm actually going to say here half a pill a day, Steve, 25 milligrams, maybe a little bit more. Um, Again, I would start with any younger listener that we did decide to go in this particular direction, 4 weeks to begin with, maybe five, maybe six. Again, older, more mature, more experienced, more PEDs under your belt, etc. You'd be looking at higher dosages, 50 milligrams, 8 weeks, not be too many problems. And we've kind of put these drugs in the order of safest, next safest, and so on and so forth. So I'm putting Anadrol here in third place. Again, lower dose. What do you think on that, Steve? And what would and would you echo my sentiments with regards to Superdrol being one to avoid if you're a younger listener?
Yeah, I always with Anadrol, I've always done better on 25 milligrams anyway. It's just such a potent steroid, so I don't see any reason if you're gonna run it solo, you could try 50, and then you can always adjust it down to 25. Yeah, I think something like Superdrol way too toxic. At the end of the day, with Superdrol, if you get into your late 20s and you want to take something that's really powerful, that could be a good option. The side effects are really, really intense with it, so you don't want to go longer than 3 weeks. But one that I really like as well, if you're into athleticism,
Yes, I was going to say this, Steve. Go on.
yeah, Toronto Bowl, T-Bowl.
Yes.
And
Yep.
that's one that I like personally. I've used more T-Bowl at my age than ever because it really fits what I'm trying to do now. So if you're someone who likes to be active, you want to go
Yes.
I don't know, snowboarding, or you want to go, you're one of those motocross athletes, or you're someone who wants to do something, you want something that's not going to cause pumps and side effects, and that's really going to be hard on your body, and basketball, whatever, football, whatever, soccer, this is a great option because it won't mess around with your body. It won't affect your cardio negatively. So T-ball is a great option. Anywhere from, I'd say, 20 to 40 milligrams would be perfect for T-ball.
There are other options, for example, using Proviron on cycle to boost the free testosterone of the products that you're already using, and that applies to injectables. Even Winstrol, Steve. But again, with Winstrol, for me, I'm going to hold off on that particular one for as long as I possibly can. I'm thinking, especially, for example, some of the side effects. It's not super, super harsh, especially run at the lower dosages. But typically, Winstrol, very rare to see that run on its own. It's almost certainly going to be part of a stack. And the approaches that Steve and I presented to you so far are single use. Literally, that would be the only, whether it's T-Bowl or Dynabol or Anavol or whatever, it is the only steroid you're using. Real simple, moderately effective, shouldn't give you too much in the way of side effects. You still want to look at, for example, AIs on a couple of these drugs. You still want to have a very good PCT in place. And again, you're listening to the show, so you're doing your research, listen to other shows on these things as well. So let's talk about some of the injectables now as well, Steve.
All right. So look, Para Pharma has amazing injectables as well. I think if you're the younger you are, I think it makes more sense to run shorter esters. So look at the injectables from Para Pharma that have this shorter ester. So it's you want to go with, instead of using the Sustanon, which has a long ester, instead of using testosterone cypionate that has a longer ester. If you want to go with the testosterone route, go with either testosterone enanthate or go with testosterone propionate, and that would make more sense to me. And because those are going to be in your system quicker and out your system quicker, so you can keep your cycles 10 weeks or less. I want you to keep your 10 cycles 10 weeks or less, especially the younger you are. If you're using steroids at 21, 22 years old, definitely want to go the shorter ester route, because this way you're able to recover a lot quicker. You're going to cause less damage. Think about it. The longer esters you use, let's say you use Sustanon or you use testosterone cypionate, it's going to be in your system 6, 7, 8, even 9 weeks after you stop injecting it. That's a long time. So if you run it for 12 weeks, it may take another 7 to 9 weeks to clear your system. That's a long time to hit on your pituitary glands, where your pituitary glands are dormant. You see what I'm saying? So look at the Parapharma, test E and test Prop first. What do you think, Monster?
I'm looking at the just on the test E, Steve. They've got two options: a test E250 and a test E400. I agree with Steve. We've talked about flexibility on cycles. So, for example, the idea of using something that you can moderate in terms of up or down on the dosage is a good idea. I certainly agree with Steve in terms of using the shorter esters. We've actually said this on a few shows and on the forum, Steve, where somebody says, "Oh, I'm thinking of trying this form of steroid." So we'll try the shorter ester because it's quick in, quick out. If you have side effects, if you have any particular issues, if there are things that you need to do with, for example, bloating, then you're having something that's flexible, something that you can change. And if, for example, Steve, again, just a straightforward testosterone, and you've used a shorter version and you find you do get on with it, then you can change to the longer version. I mean, again, a lot of what we're talking about here, guys, is managing side effects and having flexibility and using, again, the least amount. So, for example, I would probably, in this instance, Steve, towards the 250 over the 400. And as Steve said, for example, the prop, they do a Testo P100, which is their propionate testosterone. And again, smaller amounts. Total dosage, Steve, to begin with, for you younger listeners again. What do you think, Steve? 300 milligrams a week just as a starting point? 250,
So
300,
so
one or two injections a week.
I'll play a little devil's advocate on that. And I'll say, look, you're going to shut yourself down whether you run 100 milligrams or whether you want run 500 milligrams. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to go with it and run testosterone, you might as well do it. Do it. So I'd say 250 minimum up to 500 milligrams. And if you're going to go the higher end, what else do you need on this? Very, very important because you don't want to end up with bitch tits at 25 years old, right?
Yeah,
So you want to run Aromacin or Arimidex, and Para Pharma has you covered on both. So it's very, very important to do that. Just keep in
I,
mind.
I agree with Steve,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you why I was saying 250, Steve, because I think a younger, new to the game listener is going to get great fucking results, whether it's 250 or 500. I absolutely agree in terms of shutdown. So there's zero argument, none whatsoever. You are going to be shut down. But I suspect 250, 300 milligrams a week, you're going to blow the fuck up. First time's always the best time. We know that. That's almost a scientific, not quite, but almost a scientific given that you're going to get great results. I would fully expect even a younger listener using 300, never mind 500, but again, Steve is correct as well, getting great results. I could see most listeners training right, eating right, 250, 300 milligrams a week, Steve. I would fully expect, especially on the first cycle, something between 3 and 6 pounds of muscle. And I think that would be great for first time experience. Doesn't sound an enormous amount, but you'd be surprised. 10 pounds is on the average human being, especially the average male human being, 1 inch on every muscle you've got. The idea that you could blow your arms up, your chest up, your shoulders up, your thighs up, calves up, 1 inch all over it in your first cycle using 300 milligrams a week is fucking brilliant, Steve. And even if it's 400 milligrams a week. But yeah, Steve's quite correct. If the
Yeah, yeah.
shutdown is shut down, is shut down, you could err towards the 500.
Yeah.
That's coming down to the individual use.
I think if it's your first cycle, my first time using testosterone, I did 500 milligrams a week and it was crazy good. So I think I can't go back and change it. So I wonder if I'd run just 300 or 250, as Mobster said, would I have gotten the same results? I don't know. I can't go back
Mm.
and change it. So it's
Yeah,
hard to
that's
know.
why I said it's almost. I
Yeah.
wish there was more science to support that because I'd love to be able to tell the listeners this is
No,
a guarantee.
I mean, there
Yeah,
is no way. I mean, nothing when it comes to this
no,
stuff
I
is
wish.
is black and white. But the misconception out there is people think, oh, testosterone is safe. Testosterone won't shut you down. And I'm telling you, that's not true. So
Yeah.
if you're going to open this can of worms and you're going to run any of these steroids, it's a serious business. You have to make sure you keep this. You run testosterone and you don't do it right, you can not only end up shut down for a long time, you can also end up with bitch tits, and you can also end up with a lot of other estrogenic side effects. So be aware of that. Another injectable that would be a good option for, I talked about T-Bull in the last oral segment, but if you want to go the more athletic route, equipoise is a really
Mm.
good one. And equipoise is a testosterone derivative, and it's great for if you like to do a lot of cardio, if you like to stay active, like I said, or if you like to climb mountains, snowboarding, basketball, soccer, whatever, tennis. It's a great option for those of you who like to stay active in your 20s. And so with equipoise, you can run it anywhere from 200 to 300 milligrams up to 500 milligrams is plenty. And you can run a little testosterone with it, or you can run a little T-bol with it. It really is a flexible steroid to use. I really like equipoise. One of my favorites for sure. What else, Mobster?
I'm thinking Primo that was a Primo 100, Stephen. Here's my thinking. Okay, relatively mild. Gains aren't necessarily spectacular. If there's an issue, and it's not as much as an issue as it used to be, was the cost for the results. So what we call bang for your buck. So Primo is relatively mild, and I've argued this. So this is another reason why I was also thinking Primo, Steve. I would argue that probably of those of our younger listeners who want to get into shape, not everybody is necessarily looking to become, as I said at the beginning of the show, a 300-pound monster. That might be what inspires you. That might be what gets your juices going, but it might not actually be what you want. So what we would probably see a good proportion of this younger listeners, Steve, the male listeners especially, is wanting to get into shape for the girls, want to get into shape for the beach. So pretty much all your younger listeners knows what a cut is, right? Losing fat and showing your muscles off, getting some veins going. And Primo had its reputation back in the day and is making a heck of a comeback the last few years, seeing way more likely to see it in cycles as a way of retaining muscle tissue while you diet. So younger listeners be way more physically active, like Steve said, have active lifestyle, getting out there, getting your steps in, running, riding, fucking around with the guys on the basketball court, running up and down the beach. The idea of getting into shape at the beach with your six pack, training, eating right, using steroids, but retaining muscle tissue, the hard earned muscle tissue, while you're trying to get into shape. Maybe, Steve, more of a second stack rather than a first a steroid, because we're not necessarily saying that every single listener listening here is only doing the first cycle. It's just more predetermined, more aimed, shall we say, in terms of advice and suggestions towards the under 30. So I think Primo is probably more likely to be seen in your second cycle. And again, arguably, Steve, with some sort of testosterone, I would say the Primo 100 here, 100 to 200 milligrams a week with a lower end of testosterone. You might even take these numbers up to 500 milligrams as a relatively small cycle. So 300 milligrams of testosterone in amphate, as we suggested earlier, with Primo 100. I'm also perhaps thinking again, second cycle here, Steve, again with some sort of testosterone. What about Masteron? What's your thoughts on that? Just as a hard nut, and again, this is more for the listeners that's looking to be in shape rather than necessarily a pro-looking type bodybuilder. That might come later on.
Yeah, Masteron like Winstrol. It's one of those. It's a cosmetic steroid. And if you're especially mid to late 20s and you're really looking, and even early 20s, if you're looking to one day turn pro, Masteron is going to be something you're going to need to use. And Masteron is a great hardener. It's the best hardener out there. Your muscles are going to be like rocks on it. So it's going to be one that you're going to use
It's
as a
also
pre.
it's also good, Steve, at boosting free testosterone, but perhaps not as good as Provara.
Yep, that's true, and it's a good one for sure. So with the Masteron, you could go with anywhere from 250 to 500. I ran it at 500 milligrams. I thought it was a little strong at 500 milligrams. I didn't think it was necessary. But if you're competing, and if you want to start competing at a young age, you're probably going to want to run Masteron, quite a bit of Masteron, and it can get quite expensive. But luckily, Para Pharma has you covered because they have great Masteron. They have both the propionate and an enanthate. So obviously, if you want to keep your cycle shorter, you want to go with the propionate, and it's a more flexible that way. So I think these
Something,
are, yeah.
something that, sorry, something that you and I have touched upon, and this is important, a bit of information, I think, guys. We've talked about flexibility on cycle as a concept, and we've discussed this in other show. So we err towards the lower amounts, but the great advantage of being flexible is with the lower amounts, you get to find out how your body responds, how you feel, and whether there are any issues. And then, of course, if you don't have issues, if you feel great, pushing stuff up to the slightly higher numbers that we suggested is the way that you can go. The problem you have, of course, with the longer esters, any PED that's in your system relatively long, is if you start at the higher numbers, you've got to wait for it to leave your system, and you are still dealing with the side effects and the fact that you feel uncomfortable. Perhaps it was not a good idea to go into this dosage. So flexibility allows you to start low and increase versus going high and having to wait for clearance, etc., etc. And that applies again for all these things. Something that I want to talk about in terms of Para Pharma, Steve, if you've got something else, basically is, and I've said this about all good approved sources, and I'm going to just talk about this one thing now, is like any seller of PEDs, there's a fault sometimes that seems to sometimes happen with the less approved and more sort of just give us your fucking money approach that some suppliers have. And that is that they want you to use high dosages for crazy long lengths of cycle, and they don't give a fuck about your side effects, your health, your sexual health, or any of the other things that we've touched upon. Whereas a company that does, like Para Pharma, by selling solid products, quality products, wants you to take a lower dose approach, because if you take a lower dose approach and you get great results, you're going to return. If the customer service, the quality, the speed of the product getting to you was on point and you had great results, what are you going to do? You're going to tell your buddies, I use this product from Para Pharma, I put on 6 pounds, my fucking abs are blowing. I can't believe how I looked when I went on holiday. The girls were all over me. I was fucking everything at college, Steve, whatever, because you got great results and you didn't have to do crazy things. It's going to make you want to go back to that company. It's going to make you recommend these products to your buddies and so on. So talk about that sort of aspect of using quality products and doing the lower dosages as well, Steve, and how the results will encourage you for the future, etc.
Yeah, so Para Pharma, look, they have amazing customer service. They have really fast shipping. They've really sped up their shipping. We've seen guys over the holidays getting their stuff fast. They're like shocked how fast they get their stuff. Like 3, 4 days they get their stuff. It's insane. And they have amazing products. So look, their products have been tested and verified by vets who know what good gear is, what they should look like, what they should feel like. This is why professional bodybuilders trust their bodies to Para Pharma. And we see a lot of professionals doing it. We got guys logging on the forum who are using Para Pharma. So you can come on the forum, you can find out where to get Para Pharma. The best sources
I've logged their
are using them.
products. I've said this, UK 5 days to get to me, which was probably, I think they were first, and another company recently managed the same thing, equal the time. That's the fastest anybody's ever got products to be at all. I logged it, so you can come on the forum and search for my log. There are others, and I talked about the results. I was doing a cut using Para Pharma products, and I dropped, and I've said this multiple times in previous shows when we talked about Para Pharma, dropped 2 notches on my weightlifting belt, and I still not gone back up those 2 notches, Steve, in spite of whatever muscular gains and changes in body weight I've had since. So that's fantastic. Look, what's super important, and Para Pharma echoes this when we talk about this, Steve, is, as you know, quality products, quality service, quality customer service, reputation, the length of time that a company's been in the industry, certificates of analysis, test results, independent, in-house or otherwise. We touch upon this multiple times. And like I said, a company like Para Pharma, for you younger listeners, wants you to get good results. They want you to have zero or minimal issues in terms of side effects. They want to make sure that you've got everything that you might need for a cycle all in one place. All you're going to have to do if you buy a Para Pharma, Steve, is going to have to get yourself a sharp bin, syringes, and some needles. That's it. They've got everything else you want that you could possibly want for a cycle, and especially if you're new to the game. And they want you to take lower dosages, get minimal side effects, get hench, look muscular, get stronger. It's super, super important to them. And look, guys, it's the reason why we talk about certain companies like Para Pharma. Silly examples I've used before is I want to see that the products look a certain way. I've seen Mickey Mouse type fucking labels on products, mostly in Australia, it has to be said, super badly printed, wonky labels presented on a fucking website selling. Was that the best one you could take out of the pack, guys, and put in front of the camera? Come on. And even things like the way that they present themselves with, for example, Steve, the black sachets, the bags with the tablets in versus generic white ones that most companies present. All of these things are important. A reputation in industry is important. So listen, guys, when it comes to this approach, we might have bang the drum a little bit in terms of your health and your safety, but we think it would be irresponsible of us not to do otherwise. We don't want to be too preachy. We want you to understand. Come back and listen to this show again. Listen to other shows that we've done. We're not going to go too far away from the least amount you can do to get the best results, but we're specifically talking about it when it comes to the younger listener. So we think these are the top steroid cycles that we've suggested for under 30-year-old. Have you got suggestions? Have you taken a different approach? Guys, even if you've done something that you think you shouldn't have done and you've had regrets, that's going to help other listeners. So come back and let us know in the feedback, in the comments below. Come onto the forums. We want to hear what you've got to say. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience of views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.